order. Dr. Luke Evans to move the motion.
I'm very grateful to the Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your leadership today. And thank you to the staff and for those who've come out, colleagues who've come to speak in this really important debate about planning. Often, particularly in the public, they don't think about planning as something that's imperative to their life. But of course, it's something that happens to them all the time, whether they're conscious of it or not. And usually they're only conscious of it when it's oppressed on top of them. And that's a really important principle that we need to think about today when we're dealing with planning. Because at the heart of what I've brought today is neighbourhood plans, the chance for local people to take control of how they see development in their area. And I think it's useful for this 90-minute debate to set out where they came from, the problems that there are now, and most importantly, the future that we have. So if we go through the history, it was through the Localism Act in 2011 that allowed for neighbourhood plans to be brought forward. The Act allowed parishes and neighbourhood forums to develop neighbourhood development plans and neighbourhood orders. Neighbourhood plans were about the use and development of land containing a vision, aims, planning policies, proposals to improve the area or provide new facilities or allocate key sites for specific development with the possible focus of social, economic and environmental issues. Neighbourhood development orders were for parish or town councils or neighbourhood forums to grant planning permission for certain kinds of developments within a specific area. And this was all held together with the legal framework, Section 116 of the Localism Act 2011, which brought into effect Schedule 9 and inserts into the Towns and County Planning Act 1990, Schedule 10 and Schedule 11. Now, the main object of these neighbourhood plans was to guide and shape development in a particular area about national policies while conforming to local strategic policies. Changes in the Housing and Planning Act in 2016 and the Neighbourhood Planning Act 2017 sought to simplify and speed up neighbourhood planning processes. And it allowed for greater intervention from the Secretary of State in the process of making neighbourhood plans. Further still, in the Housing and Planning Act 2016, LPAs were required to make both neighbourhood development plans and neighbourhood development orders as soon as reasonably practicable and after the referendum is held. There was a further update in the Neighbourhood Planning Act in 2017, allowing neighbourhood plans to be modified and dealt with where situations when the plan is needed, but covering slightly different geographical areas to the previous one. And finally, changes to the National Planning Policy Framework in 2018. Neighbourhood plan policies where the supply of housing should not be considered to be out of date if the plan is less than 2 years old. So we have a little bit of a background about neighbourhood plans and where we're at. But it's worth talking a little bit about the overview of the process involved in getting a neighbourhood plan up to date. So draft plans and orders must pass an independent check, then put to a local referendum. If there is a majority vote in favour, the local planning authority must adapt that plan subject to legal compatibility. Now, the LPA has a statutory role to support neighbourhood planning, such as undertaking independent examination of the neighbourhood plan and run neighbourhood planning referendum. The government states that neighbourhood planning should not be a way to block necessary development, that plans should support the strategic needs set out in the local plan, and it can't promote less development than set out in said local plan. Now, neighbourhood plans can allocate additional sites to those in the local plan and propose different sites to those in the local plan in discussion with the local planning authority. And the plan can identify areas for protection, such as open spaces valued by the community or green spaces meeting local green space criteria. Now, that's where we've come from. And actually, broadly speaking, that's a great principle to take forward. And I think most of this House would agree that the principles enshrined here in this legislation are moving in the right direction. But what is the reality that we currently live with at the moment? Well, it's fair to say neighbourhood plans are not for everyone, and nor should they be. Communities should want to come forward to design and shape the role of their community, what that planning should look like, and in essence, the shape and feel of what they have. Now, in my area, in Bosworth, many groups have come forward by choice to make a difference and take responsibility for their local planning area. But also a second reason is necessity. Necessity out of the fact that the system is failing because there aren't protections because we don't have an up-to-date local plan. So let me talk you through the example that we are living with at the moment. I have two tiers of councils, a county council and a borough council. The borough council being responsible for the local plan, but of course the county council intersect with the infrastructure and signing off that plan, all through the framework of national planning. This is a very difficult issue for an MP, because on the one hand, it is the commonest thing that comes into my inbox about the inappropriate development going into my area, while at the same time people asking for me to step in and make a difference and make a change on individual planning applications. We all know, sat around this room, that an MP cannot do that. This means, in essence, without an up-to-date local plan, it is open season in my area. My area is a desirable place to live. Logistically, it is perfectly set in the heart of the UK. Quite literally, we have the middle of England in my constituency. Beautiful rural countryside close to a city like Leicester. There's a lot on offer in my area. The problem is, with a piecemeal approach to planning, we have huge problems on how we solve the infrastructure, the amenities and the services that we need in our area. Now, nationally, we all agree across this House that we need more houses. Locally, this message has seemed to be lost, with the local Liberal Democrats saying that it's the government's agenda of putting 300,000 houses into the UK that is the issue. Yet, in that same manifesto in 2019, the Liberal Democrats, and I quote, under their access to affordable housing, states, we should build at least 100,000 homes for housing, for social housing, and ensure total house building increases to 300,000 each year. The reason I raise this point up is because at the essence of our housing system, we need the right houses in the right place, with the right infrastructure, with the right protections for our heritage and our environment. We need houses that families can aspire to. And in my area, more importantly, we need houses that elderly generation can downsize to, both of which we are struggling, not just in my area, but across the country. And without getting this right, we risk losing what we have in our vibrant rural aspects by having this suburban sprawl with no thought to where it should be. Piecemeal development does not help anyone, from the schooling, from the infrastructure to the amenities with doctors' surgeries, when we know the country is under pressure. So how do we take that forward? Well, neighbourhood plans are actually a really good way of trying to help that. And this is where national policy intersects with localism, and rightfully so. And in my constituency, I have vanguard neighbourhood plans like Market Bosworth, who've been leading the way in developing their plans and have done for years. But various other areas, such as Markfield, Stoke Golding and Burbage, who have all at various different levels of working their way through their neighbourhood plans. And I'm eternally grateful for the councils and the individual constituents who've taken the time to go through this, at times, laborious, technical, painstaking process to try and get a result. And what infuriates them more than anything else is the fact that this is ridden roughshod over by the fact of not having an up-to-date local plan. So we must find a way to try and strengthen neighbourhood plans. Now, the House of Commons Library does point, when asked, can a neighbourhood plan come forward before an up-to-date local plan is in place? Well, it goes on to state, where a neighbourhood plan is brought forward before an up-to-date local plan is in place, the qualifying body and local planning authority should discuss and aim to agree the relationship between the policies in the emerging neighbourhood plan, the emerging local plan, the adopted development plan, and with appropriate regard to national policy and guidance. So there is a framework there, but I question, what does that actually look like in reality? So, if only there was a piece of legislation looking forward, a legislative vehicle coming forward that could make a change. Well, it just so happens, those eagle-eyed amongst you, tomorrow will have seen there is a bill being brought forward to try to pull together 70 years of a fragmented planning system to try and streamline it. And I am really pleased, for one, to see that this is taking place. I think there's lots to like in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill. Simplification, design codes, choices, opening up for developers, the different choices of developers, and stopping land banking. Many of this is far wider than the debate that we have today. But there are 5 guiding principles, and those of you who have heard me speak on planning before argue the acronym with the Secretary of State, but I won't be going there today. But the aim of this bill is to support local communities' control over what is built, where it is built, and what it looks like, and to create an incentive to welcome development meeting set standards with aims to deliver high-quality design and beautiful places and protect our heritage, enable the right infrastructure to come forward where it's needed, enable local democracy and engagement, foster better environmental outcomes, and allow neighbourhoods to shape their surroundings, as this is where the impact in planning is most immediately felt. That last point's really important, and that's why I've called the debate today. Now, in and amongst those details, the plan talks about, the bill talks about, local plans will be given more weight when making decisions on applications, same weight given to other parts of development plans, including neighbourhood plans prepared by local communities. Now, opportunities for communities and interested parties to influence and comment on the emerging plans, supported by digitalisation to ensure plans and data are accessible and understood easily. And ensuring that neighbourhood plans are given weight in planning decisions and development of neighbourhood priorities, with a statement to be taken into account when preparing the local plan. There are additional parts that go on to say neighbourhood plan focusing on development and the use of land that contributes to the mitigation of and adaptation of climate change. Now, this comes forward in a way of a neighbourhood priority statement with the principles of a prevailing view of a community in a neighbourhood area. Now, these local matters may well include development, housing, natural environment, the economy, public space, infrastructure, facilities, services in that local area. So I think from what you've heard me say in the opening part of the debate, this is the prime evolution of where we are going with localism and neighbourhood plan. And I'm pleased to see that. I'd be more pleased to see when the Minister stands up, if he'll address some of these areas, to be able to talk what this will actually look like, to make sure when the system is working well, it is running at its full potential. But more so when the system starts to fall apart, what that means for a community like mine. So in closing, Chair, we've seen where the evolution of neighbourhood plans has come from. I've hopefully touched on a little bit about the problems faced when things don't quite go to plan, pardon the pun. But of course we have the opportunity for the future. And I think we can all agree, yet again, we need the right houses in the right place, with the right infrastructure and the right protections for our heritage and environment. And I'll be grateful if the Minister would respond.
Mr. Pennycook, I now ask the Minister, Mr. Stuart Andrew.
Thank you very much, Ms Garney. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. And can I also say a big thank you to my honourable friend, the member for Bosworth, for securing this very important debate today. And to all honourable members who have taken part and given their own experiences from their own constituencies on the importance of neighbourhood planning. Now, I know that my honourable friend has been and remains a tireless champion of both neighbourhood plans and neighbourhood planning in his contributions to debates and in his many ministerial correspondence to me, he has been consistent in being an advocate for a more democratic and locally led planning system. So perhaps unlike other Westminster Hall debates, this might be one of those rare occasions where the Minister responding on behalf of the Government almost entirely agrees with all honourable members' contributions. And I certainly hope that my comments today will reassure him and other honourable members that the Government is committed to putting communities at the very heart of our planning system, with neighbourhood plans, of course, playing a crucial role in that area. But before I say more about how we're working to make that vision a reality, I should say to honourable members that I am, of course, unable to comment on specific cases due to my quasi-judicial role in the planning system. However, I can talk in general terms about many of the issues that have been raised in this debate today. From the outset, let me say that the Government believes neighbourhood planning offers a powerful set of tools for local people to shape development in their area. Development that meets their community's needs, from protecting green spaces and local heritage right down to the design and the characteristics of new homes. As honourable members will know, these plans continue to have real statutory weight in planning decisions. Once made, they form part of the development plan for the local area, alongside the local plan, and become the starting point for decisions on individual planning applications. In fact, the National Planning Policy Framework is clear that where a planning application conflicts with an up-to-date neighbourhood plan, permission should not usually be granted. And it's important to stress that the framework affords certain neighbourhood plans additional protections if the local planning authority cannot demonstrate a 5-year land supply of deliverable housing sites, something which I know my honourable friend has identified as a serious cause of concern for residents in his own constituency. These additional protections kick in where plans are under 2 years old, meet their identified housing requirement and other conditions are met. Local planning authorities, of course, play an important role in this process too. They must provide advice and assistance to neighbourhood planning groups when producing their plans and take decisions at key stages. Planning legislation and policy is also clear that emerging neighbourhood plans can also be afforded weight in decision-making, particularly when they are at an advanced stage of preparation. I'm delighted to say that many communities have taken up the opportunity to prepare a neighbourhood plan since the policy was first introduced. Over 2,800 groups having started the process since 2012, and over 1,300 plans are now in place across the country. I understand that there are no fewer than 6 in my honourable friend's constituency of Bosworth. And I'd like to take this opportunity to express my admiration for the communities who have taken the time to prepare these neighbourhood plans, bringing local people together to shape development in a way that meets their needs. There are some really brilliant examples of this work all over the country. The Bridport area plan in Dorset, for example, covers 4 parish councils and is located entirely in a designated area of outstanding natural beauty. The councils are working in partnership there to make sure that high-quality design goes into every affordable home which is built so that they are indiscernible from the available houses on the open market. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I apologise for interrupting the Minister because he's giving an excellent speech and very robust answers to some of the issues that we raised. The policy document that was put forward alongside the bill talks about scrapping the 5-year land supply for local authorities that have got up-to-date local plans. So can he just confirm that that will actually be within the legislation either tomorrow or future in committee stage, or how that's actually going to come to be in black and white in statute?
So he is right. That is one of the big issues I have had in the time that I've been in this role, and I've had in my own constituency, it's the real issue where where councils do not have a local plan in place. They are, or even if they do in some instances, if they don't have the 5-year land supply, the speculative development that happens all over, and it pits communities against any sort of housing developments. We are making it very clear through the bill. there'll be supporting documents that will be published alongside this. We'll make it very clear that where an area has a local, an up-to-date local plan, there is no need for them to prove that they have a 5-year land supply to stop that speculative development happening. I'll give way to my friend.
Let's go to the Minister for giving way. And I very much welcome that stipulation in the bill tomorrow. However, will you give consideration to one problem which I immediately suspect may arise, namely that if we give notice to developers that this particular clause is coming into place in a year's time, or that the local plan may well take a few more months or a year to complete, that there will then be a deluge of speculative developments in the meanwhile, which we cannot stop until such time as the laws become an act.
Well, I know from the conversation that I had with my honourable friend the other day that that was a point he raised with me, and it's a very valid point and one that I am taking back with me to the department to just double check that we've got all this in place, because it is a really important point. As I was mentioning, the neighbourhood plan that is in Dorset, that closer to home here in London, the Greater Carpenters Plan in Newham, is a post-war estate seeking to develop and reoccupy existing empty homes. Their policy emphasises affordability, prioritising low-cost family-sized homes and homes for older and disabled people, a textbook example of community-backed sustainable development. We want to see more areas following their lead, which is why we've put in place £40 million of funding up until 2023 to make sure that residents have the tools and the resources they need to get their plans in place. So in many ways, neighbourhood planning has been a great success story, but the government and I want to see and to encourage more communities to get involved and have a real say over what gets built and where locally. And that's why the bill that has been mentioned on many occasions today, the important role that neighbourhood plans will continue to play in the planning system are included. It makes clear that communities will be able to continue allocating sites for housing, protecting green spaces and local assets, and setting design requirements for new development through their plans. And crucially, the bill will also strengthen the role of neighbourhood plans in decision-making. Decisions on planning applications will only be able to depart from plans if there are strong reasons to do so. While neighbourhood planning is widespread, we know, and I take the Honourable Gentleman's point, that take-up is uneven across the country. In some areas, particularly in towns and cities, there is usually very little neighbourhood planning activity. We also recognise that some communities have faced challenges in getting a neighbourhood plan in place, and we want to make sure that all areas can get involved. So, through the bill, we are introducing neighbourhood priority statements, a new additional tool that will provide a simpler, faster and more accessible way for communities to participate in neighbourhood planning and shape development in their local areas. These statements can be prepared by neighbourhood planning groups and can be used to set out the community's priorities and preferences for their local area. Everything from the new facilities they need to the buildings and the green spaces that they want protected. In fact, we anticipate that in some areas they could also act as a springboard for preparing a full neighbourhood plan, a design code or other community initiatives outside of the planning system. Councils will be required to consider these statements when they are preparing their own local plans, meaning that they can't be easily brushed aside. They have to be treated as formal input. Taken together, we're confident that these reforms will further cement, if you forgive the pun, the role of neighbourhood planning in the system, and perhaps more importantly, it will provide communities with more opportunities to influence developments right on their doorstep. I wanted to turn to a couple of the points that honourable members have mentioned. I want to make it very clear that I am a huge fan of neighbourhood planning. I'm fortunate enough that I have two parish council and town council in Rawdon and Horsforth in my constituency, but also a group of volunteers in Aireborough that are developing neighbourhood planning. And I have seen firsthand the enormous amount of time that they put into developing them. And I've also, in the first few weeks of doing this role, was keen to do a round table with neighbourhood planning groups around the country, and it was really useful to listen to their experiences, and we have taken a lot of what they've said on board, and we're currently looking at how we can further improve these areas. But I think the number of points that people have made today is that where it is locally driven, we often see more houses actually getting built. And I was particularly struck, I think it was in Herefordshire, the official from the council said that because they'd invested in neighbourhood planning and they supported neighbourhood planning, they ended up seeing more houses being built than they could possibly have achieved as a council. And I'd like to see that happen elsewhere. My honourable friend was right when he said that too often planning is something that people feel happens to them, and we have to change that. That's why in the bill we want to make local plan making easier so that more people can get engaged and that they can do so digitally. You don't have to go through hundreds of PDFs and complicated documents. And he is right that it is about building the right houses in the right places. That will get public support for house building and try and stop the problems that we've seen. And he's right to have mentioned the Biden principles, which I think really do stand for many of the things that we want to see. And he was completely right to raise the issue of old people's housing too. We are soon to establish a task force to look into this so that we do provide our older generations with a choice of housing that they may need, not just one type of housing, so that we can help them downsize if they want to. It's not to force them to. Thank you, Brian.
You don't agree with me, there's one other area which needs to be looked at, particularly in the area of older people's housing, and namely better use of the stock that we have. There are at this moment 800,000, I think is the figure, empty houses in the United Kingdom. We must find a way of making better use. Many of those empty houses are old people's houses they've inherited or they've perhaps moved out of them. They're sitting there, they don't know what to do with them. Can we find a way of writing into the bill some means by which we can make better use of the existing stock?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. It's not just about building new homes, it's making sure it's efficient use of the stock that we have as well. And there are a number of measures in the bill to try and encourage the use of empty homes particularly. The issue of the validity, the 2-year validity of a plan, it was something that was raised at that round table, and again it's something that we are currently looking at. I've mentioned the issue around the 5-year land supply that has been suggested to us, and also the whole issue of the local housing need figures are something that we are trying to resolve as quickly as possible. The honourable member for Strangford, I love the fact that he comes to each of these debates to give a Northern Ireland perspective, and particularly helpful on this. Although I think there were a few scratching heads when I remember I was in a debate once talking about HS2, and I thought, well, if we can't even get it to Leeds, how are we going to get it to Northern Ireland? But there you go. And he's right to talk about things like the areas of outstanding natural beauty and the protections, and I think this is where neighbourhood planning can be more imaginative about the sites that could be developed. I've seen that in my own community where they are really very clever. And he's also right to talk about the provision of infrastructure, and that is why the I in Biden is so important. The levy that we're introducing will capture more of the land value, so there's more money for the local community to have that investment. But I think one of the things I've certainly picked up, we need better engagement between the local plan development and the provision of health services so that we can make sure that they all come at the same time. I think people get frustrated when they see the houses and it seems years later, or if ever, that the infrastructure that is needed to support them comes down the line. And then on to my honourable friend from Totnes, he's quite right to say that local people know best, and the design standards that we're putting in this bill it'll be a key project for many of those local communities to do, so that it actually complements the local area, the new developments that we have. Now, on the issue of the national management, development management policy, I know that people are concerned, but it's not to override a local plan. The local plan has that supremacy, if you like, because it is the local plan. However, there is an enormous amount of duplication that is happening in the development of local plans. For example, protections on greenbelt, heritage sites, and so on. So, and many local authorities are not confident that there's enough weight in the current system. So this is to try and stop that duplication happening and to make sure that we do have those protections in place. But again, I have listened to what colleagues have been saying, concerns that they've had about those issues, and we are actively looking at many of the points that have been raised. Thank you, Wayne.
Again, apologies for interrupting, but in which case, and I accept the Minister's response on that, but the explanatory notes and within the text of the actual bill, it talks about in the event of conflict between national plan, a local plan and a national plan. So what does he envisage the conflict to be in a scenario where it may override a domestic plan?
So what I'd say about these is that it will not be possible to set land uses through national development policy. No housing will ever be built on sensitive sites if the local authority opposes them because of any of the NDM policies. So I hope I can give that reassurance. But if he will allow me, I have heard some of the points, and I will come back to him. Ms Garney, I'd like to close by, again, thanking my honourable friend for raising this important debate today. I'm grateful for the opportunity to reiterate the government's commitment to putting local communities in the driving seat of simpler, smoother and more inclusive planning system. And I should also add that many of the measures we've set out in the bill, like neighbourhood priority statements, will be honed and refined as we put the legislation on the statute book. And I know I speak not just for myself, but for all my ministerial colleagues, in saying that we are committed to working closely with honourable members on all sides of the House to make sure that we get these reforms right and that we get them delivered on the ground and that they deliver the improvements we all want to see and that they help us to fulfil our pledge to level up communities right across the country.
Thank you, Minister. And it'd be remiss of me not to mention how important this debate is to my constituents as well in Wilden. Dr. Luke Evans, would you like to wind up?
Thank you very much, Chair. May I thank the staff again for their attendance here and the wise intervention from the Chair herself. This has been very much an interesting debate that has brought forward around planning. I'm hugely grateful to all the speakers today. The member for North Wiltshire, if he isn't a knight after his speech, he should definitely be a knight. That in itself was a huge Bible of information to come through. But I'd like to pick up particularly on the 5-year housing land supply, which the Minister has addressed. I think the key thing is building out was his point, that once you have that approval given, that it should be built out to make sure that's taken forward. When we go to Strangford in Northern Ireland, it's fantastic to hear the experience. I'm not going to shame the honourable member by saying I was born in 1983, and I think he said 1985, which 26 years worth of experience means I have a lot to learn. And in his speech, he hit on the nub of what I think we're talking about today, which was better homes. That's a really important piece of information to take away when we deal with that, and I'll come back to that in my closing remarks, because that brings access and all the problems that we have and potential solutions for building better lives for people. If I turn to the member for Totnes, I don't think anyone's ever called him a banana before, but maybe this should be a precedent. His hunger, his voice, his tireless energy in bringing this debate forward. His constituents are very lucky to have him as such a representative going forward. And he harked at something which is really important, the support for those who want to be enabled to deal with planning. And that strikes to the Shadow Minister. I'm grateful for his comments, but he is right. Take-up is not as high as it should be. It is complicated, it is difficult, it is daunting. And so we should be encouraging and supporting people to be able to go through that process.